Hi. So one thing I come to find out about not having a solidified sense of self, which is common among people with people pleasing tendency, because it is a different thing in the case of people who lost their self identities or are repeatedly creating a new one due to their need to belong or fit to certain group. For people with people pleasing behavioral tendency, what is actually at play is this subconscious incessant need to not conflict with anyone. Imagine the most important thing to you in your life is peace. And it's not going to be quite negative if you seek peace in your life, but the drive that motivates these people is the need to not contradict anyone with the expectation, emphasis on expectation. They are doing this with the expectation that this is in return reciprocated because of that fear of conflict. They are people who have learned from very early age to read the room so as to know what to do in order to not upset anyone around them, primarily their caregivers. So an individual who grew up in an environment that compelled them to incorporate emotional suppression in order to feel safe or even liked or to be adored in any way, we go into adulthood and relieve these patterns in whatever situation because the ego has been formed around the basis of being good and being approved and being harmless. And unlike everyone you might have seen who might have come out to assess the dynamics of this people placing personality tendency, I'm actually not here to reinforce how people with this personality tendency are not exactly who they present to be because they are operating from an ego that is defensive and that tries to manipulate the situation in order to manage the outcome in a way that they feel liked or needed or their ego is oiled. Because while these assertions are very true, I think it is so important that rather than putting every focus on how these people self-neglect when in the process of being receptive and kind and accommodating and all of that, we equally need to juxtapose these traits together with the absence of them because then we are confronted with individuals who have zero empathy, right? Very selfish individuals who could not care less about the people they have around them and so forth. So, dutifully, while we create awareness about the relationship between the inclination to be this overly good and agreeable person, even at the expense of your comfort, right? And a defective ego formation, right? And how to go about dissolving this ego in order to become a more structured individual who is considerate of themselves, it will not be a complete sentence until we insert and others. The failure to do this, as we can see, has a very negative impact and we continue to do so because then even people with perfectly structured ego we hear such thing as the desire to be considerate of other people and seek regularity is as a result of a sense of self that is outsourced to external validations, that they need to feel like this good person or somebody that is liked or somebody that is needed by the people around you is driven by thirst to preserve a certain image, like this image, oh, the very good person, this very generous person, the very matured one. Consequently, right, this perfectly fine people who are just exhibiting normal human decency may be in part to withdraw because that is the first thing to signal that they are ready to heal the fractured ego. And the same goes for people who in fact have this personality tendency when ironically, okay, the dissolution of this ego, if it is present at all, does not happen from becoming harsher or less caring or inconsiderate of people. Okay, instead it is from decoupling self-worth from reception, essentially, because then we have altruism, which connotes, this selfless concern for other people without so much care about one's own interests. And we can see now that the only line between this, altruism, and the services done for people from the end of somebody who needs to do so with the need to feel safe in their environment, is the hope to reinforce identity, essentially. And you see, the ground on which communities and human relationships stand, and if we ever care that those continue, right, we continue to stand, is on inconvenience. If you have parents, you are obliged to do things to make them happy. Same for if you have children, you are going to compromise for them a lot. That is the order of the day, right? When you have siblings, you have to learn to live with each other's differences. Same for when you have friends, you have to learn to be patient and wait extra minutes for them on days they are late. When you have a lover, you have to know that there are days you are going to watch movies that you are totally not interested in, etc. So are we going to label these inconveniences negatively, or are we going to create a world where we are detrimentally encouraging people to just don't do it if you don't feel like doing it, so that it doesn't inconvenience you? Just don't do it if you don't want to do it, so that you don't inconvenience yourself. Isn't that simply creating an even more enabling environment for even utterly selfish people? So you see why it is very important that instead of focusing on encouraging those who could have grown up in environments where they have had to sacrifice themselves for peace, who in return go into adulthood serving people at their detriment to become shrewd and astute and all of that, we should put more effort into opening their eyes to see self advocating not as something to feel guilty about. And instead of being fine with everything just to feel safe in your environment or to belong in your surroundings or for moral superiority sometimes, or to be exempted from rejection, you should create an identity, a sense of self where other people rejecting you doesn't do as much as strengthening your self-worth and identity. And an identity where caring for other people is done without self-erasure, and kindness and consideration for other people is not a performance to feel liked or praised, but just because you recognize that this is right and is expected of a decent human being, essentially.